And then the more instinctual or even animal-like aspects of man, I'm talking now about simple bodily functions, these things come to the fore. And that's why people feel an alcoholic high as a stimulant. But it actually depresses what's higher or noble about the human character, and therefore elevates the baser instincts. This being the case, drunkenness is characterized, and this is the whole way the Bible presents it, drunkenness is characterized by a loss of control, a loss of inhibitions. Normally, you would be more restrained. Normally, you have sense of social conventions and right behavior. But when you're drunk, your feelings, your thoughts, your words, and your actions are out of control. People do strange, bizarre, absurd, disgusting things when drunk. It affects most obviously our speech. The content of the speech of a drunk man is typically foolishness and nonsense. Talks rubbish. You know the classic example of two drunk men talking together by an open fire, and as they're drunk, they think in their conversation that they have solved all the problems of the civilized world. And then they wake up the next morning with a headache, and they realize that it was all just hot air. Sometimes when people get drunk, they talk too much. On and on and on they rabbit. Other people are affected differently in that they speak too little. They become morose and uncommunicative. You see it sometimes too with drunken people. They will dance in the street. So silly bodily movements. An absurd sort of hilarity. The world recognizes that drunkenness causes a loss of control. We see it especially in the advertising campaigns. Do not drink and drive. Because when you drink, your perceptions of the world around you, your reaction time, all suffer. And you're a danger to yourself and anybody you may meet on the road. Another feature of drunkenness, and it's taking away our sense of control, is seen in the aggression which it often promotes. Violence, street fighting, revelry, riot. You see it every now and again in the news, some drunken louts in the city centre smashing up windows and assaulting old ladies. Drunkenness. They wouldn't do that if they were sober, but they lose control. And so we see on Saturday nights the accident and emergency sections of our hospitals being inundated with drunken people and people who've been suffering through their drunk, through fights and whatnot. Following on from this idea of a loss of control comes the idea of depression. Drunkenness can give someone, for a short time, an artificial high. But often, and especially with some sorts of people, it induces deeper depression and despair. People do not drink because they're happy. They drink because they're sad and they want to forget things, ordinarily, typically. Drinking furthers depressive moods because when you're drunk, you don't think straight. And this is a bad idea for someone given to depression, because depressed people do not think straight. That's why they're depressed. They have abnormal, unusual, unregulated fears that cripple them. They make up all sorts of false worlds for themselves, and they're not living in the world as it really is. And therefore, they're depressed with this warped view of reality. And one of the judgments which God afflicts now upon people who drink too much, and following along that line of loss of control, God gives them over to addiction to it. Drunkenness, or more therapeutically, alcoholism, is a judgment from God. That person has willingly put themselves out of control repeatedly, and God in his just judgment says, I will put you so out of control that you can't even stop your drinking without an enormous effort and a great deal of help, usually from other people. You're going to find it very hard to stop it. And the more you give in to this sin, and the more you lose your self-control, then the harder and harder you'll find it to break that habit. This, of course, is a vicious cycle, because as you spiral down and down, your world becomes bleaker and more dismal, and you more and more want to escape from it. You're filled with fears and dreads, oftentimes because your drunkenness has affected you financially. You're in debt. You're maybe going to be thrown out of your house. You've lost your job because of habitual drunkenness. And then, of course, you want to forget it all, so you get drunk, and it makes the whole problem worse and worse and worse. Be not drunk with wine, wherein is dissipation, riotousness, and loss of control. And related to this loss of control is, of course, waste of time. You waste time when you're out drinking. You waste time when you're recovering. You're going to need to sleep more. You've got a headache and you're not fit to do your work. You're rubbing those bleary eyes and drinking black coffee to try and recover. Then you lose hours at work. You're not able to look after your home and your family. And you experience what's called the morning after the night before. And then, and this is the book of Proverbs, whenever the person sobers up, often he says, I will seek it again. I'll go back to it. I'll go back to it. And he's only just cleared up the vomit. And he's mad enough to go back to it. So little self-control that he becomes enslaved to drunkenness. Waste of time through this loss of control. Waste of money. The money that is wasted on drink. Large part of it, of course, being taxes, so that the government then can support the number of police in the street and hospital services and ambulances to facilitate the drunken habits of the ungodly. Waste of money by going on the whole party scene. Costs sometimes money to get into these drinking dives. Loss of money because when you were out of control you have been pickpocketed, or you have just left your wallet sitting on a table somewhere. Or being out of control and not able to think straight, someone has come along and swindled you. Your work suffers. Maybe you're unemployed, therefore. And the law-abiding citizen, ultimately, he loses money. We lose money. Because somebody somewhere has to pay for all this. This is also related, this loss of control through drunkenness, to a loss of purity. Many, especially girls, fornicate for the first time when they were drunk. And the fellas put them up to it and plied them with drink deliberately. Some friends, some movement. Lovely. Many people engage in adultery in connection with drunkenness. Men and women out of control sexually because of drunkenness. Now, when this passage says, be not drunk with wine, it also means, of course, be not drunk with beer. Drunkenness is the thing. Be not drunk with spirits. Be not drunk also applies to drugs, because drugs produce a drunken state too. This biblical prohibition forbids drug abuse as well as alcohol abuse. You'll notice that our text, verse 18, begins with the word and. The sentences before it read, verses 15 through 17, see then that ye walk circumspectly, carefully, aware of your environment, not as fools, but as wise. Walk, that is, live carefully.